All right, Jabosai, good morning. Let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, an incredible daf ahead of us today. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar. Yona Shushie Ehrenfeld for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in memory of Yona's grandfather, Yosef ben Shmuel Aron. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family in nechama. We thank our Week of Learning sponsor, Jack Bennett, for dedicating the learning this week in memory of Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport of the Givati Brigade, who was killed in Lebanon in a Hezbollah ambush on February 7th, 1998. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah and his family in nechama. And we thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Zevi and Shoshi Daniel, for dedicating the shir today in the Zechus of Refuah Shlema for Yaakov ben Chava Rachel. We hope that he, together with Kol Choli Yisrael, have a complete and enduring refuah. And we'll say we have an anonymous dedication today in honor of the 73rd anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel and in celebration of Yoma Atzmaut. We hope that just as we have been Zocha Meretz Hashem to see not the beginning, because it's not the beginning. The Baruch Hashem, the process of Geula has been occurring since the first day that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. But halavai, we should be zocha that the additional steps that we saw in the Hakamas HaMedina and the beautiful actualization and revitalization of our ancestral homeland will Emirat Hashem continue day after day. And halavai, we should be zocha to the Geula Shlema Mihir Rabbi Ameinu. Amen. We'll say with that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Daf Dalid. Daf Dalid, and we are picking up Emirat Hashem on Gimel Amid Beis. So we left off, I believe, Amalei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, which was on 3b, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. I'm supposed to just reorient ourselves a little bit. It's amazing. Still same sugi. It feels like we've been doing Yoma for a long time. But we haven't. It's only been 2 days. But interesting enough, what's been fascinating about the last 2 days is it's been the same discussion. So remember again, just to retrace our steps for a moment. So remember again, we have the Mishnah introducing us to the concept that the Kohen Gadol is sequestered 7 days before Yom Kippur in order to properly learn the details of the avoda. The Gemara then introduced to us, by the way, this concept of sequestering is not unique to Yom Kippur, but you also find it by Para Aduma. Where do we learn the concept from? So the Gemara explains the source is the Miluim, inauguration of the Mishkan. Kohanim were sequestered for 7 days, and ultimately, again, by Yom HaShmini, on the 8th day is when they began their avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. We then have been going through a series of machloksim in terms of what's the source for this, right? So some understanding that in the pasuk of Miluim it says Lasos lechaper, Lasos is my separa, lechaper is my Yom Kippur. We saw others who learned it out from Gzera Shavat, Tziva, again trying to figure out, and then we spent a significant amount of time trying to figure out why Paraduma. Maybe it's other things that have a din of sequestering. So essentially what we've come out with is, in order to be subject to the din of sequestering, to the din of hafrasha, you have to what? You have to effectively resemble miluim in all the significant ways. And if you don't go ahead and resemble miluim in all the significant ways, there is no din of hafrasha, no din of sequestering. We then, again, Abosai, frame this in the machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, right? Rabbi Yochanan ultimately only learns out Yom Kippur from miluim, does not learn out Paraduma, and Reish Lakish learns out both. So now the Gemara says, the Gemara says, Amalei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Yochanan, Mehecha Kayalfis, from where do you learn out Yom Kippur? The din of hafrasha by Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Miluim, from Miluim. Okay, Ima Miluim kalakasav ben ma'akiv bahen, af hachanami kalakasav ben ma'akiv bahen. So if you're going to learn out from Miluim, so we know that by the Miluim, by the inauguration, anything written by the inauguration is ma'akiv. In other words, say any part of the procedure that's written in the Torah, by definition, is an indispensable cog in the preparatory wheel. And if you leave it out, you undermine the avoda. So we should say the same thing by the preparation for Yom Kippur. Anything that's mentioned, ultimately, again, should be indispensable. Now, 1 second, the Gemara says, if that's the case, so maybe you'll say that's true. This is incredible. We'll say this is fascinating. If you tell me that hafrasha, that sequestering of the Kohen Gadol prior to Yom Kippur, is an indispensable part of the avodah of Yom Kippur, here's the problem. What did the Mishnah say? We appoint a backup. Right, we saw this. We appoint a backup Kohen Gadol. We'll say, what doesn't the Mishnah say? Now, again, when you imagine that backup Kohen Gadol, what do you imagine? Where is he? Where is he? He's home. He's home. Now, he's on call. Chas Hashem, should something happen to the Kohen Gadol, he dies, he becomes tummy, he becomes disqualified, a mum, so he's on call. The Mishnah doesn't say that we sequester him also. So we'll say, let's play this out. Let's say something happens to the Kohen Gadol, and therefore he can't do the avodah. We're going to call up this guy, we're going to call up the backup Kohen Gadol. Great, he's ready for service. One problem, which is, he hasn't been sequestered. And now if you're telling me that Yom Kippur is like Miluim, and anything written by Miluim is Ma'akev, so too anything written by Yom Kippur is Ma'akev, if that's the case, then at the end of the day, how could the backup Kohen Gadol go ahead and function without having been sequestered? To which the Gemara says, V'chi tema my maskinon mafrishin. Maybe you'll say when the Mishnah says we prepare him, maybe that means also we sequester him. They can't do that. Listening, o idi v'idi maskinin, o idi v'idi mafrishin. If that's the case, then really you should use the same lashon. Then used by both kohanim, maskinin or mafrishin. So the Gemara will say ends off with that. The Reish Lakish ends off with that kasha. Amrle, Rabbi Yochanan says Reish Lakish. Amrle, mar mehecha yalif. Where do you learn out the obligation from? Amar Sinai. So both say this is very interesting. Reish Lakish apparently learns out the Iker Din Hafrasha from Har Sinai. Listen to this. Tichsiv vayishkon kavod Hashem al Har Sinai vaychasea anon sheshes yamim. The pasuk says, the honor, the glory of God rested on the mountain, covered it up for 6 days, and ultimately again, Vayikra al Moshe v'yom hashvi'i, and then Hashem only called out to Moshe Rabbeinu on the 7th day. So Michdi Ksiv Vayikra al Moshe v'yom hashvi'i, it says that Hashem called out to Moshe on day number 7, my sheishes yamim. So what about the 6 days? What are those? To which the Gemara says Zeh bana av. So Rabbi say a binyan av is a paradigm. It creates a paradigm. Shekala nichnas b'machane shchina. Whenever you are entering into machane shchina, which means that whenever you are entering into the closest proximity to God. So, for example, by Har Sinai, machane shchina was the mountain. Right? Ultimately, again, by the Mishkan, it'll be the Mishkan. By Yom Kippur, it's the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If you're going into machane shchina, ta'on prisha shisha. You need 7 days of sequestering and preparation. Okay, that's fine. There's only one problem. What does the Mishnah say? Va'anan shivatanan. That's fine, but the Mishnah says 7 days. That we prepare for 7 days. Most is very interesting. Masnisin, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseirihi, dechayish tap of dalit letumas beso. To which the Gemara says, you're right. It could very well be that me'ikar adin on a doraisa level, 7 days of sequestered preparation are enough. So where does the 7th day? The 7th day is an extra added chumrah based on the concern of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, who is choshesh for what he calls tumas beso. Take a look at the top Rashi, Daled Amadav, tumas beso. Shema im yizakik leishto v'tira dam b'shazbia v'nimtza tamei shivas yamim kemishpat boel nida v'lo yochol la'avo b'yom kippur. Because both say there's a concern that maybe right before the period of sequestering, a man, the Kohen Gadol, or whoever it is who's sequestering, will be with his wife. And let's say a woman becomes a nida during relations. So we'll say, remember again, midda oraisa, tumas nida is only 7 days. The fact that we have a much longer period for nida of 12 days is a result of the merging of the halachos of nidos and zava gidola. Not our topic. But nida, right, Nidoraisa, Tumas nida is 7 days. So the concern is that maybe right before sequestering is going to be with his wife, and maybe again she's going to become a nida, and therefore by definition, if you're only observing 6 days, it's going to leave him short to be able to be tar for the avodah. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, even though the obligatory biblical sequestering might be 6 days, we add on the 7th day just to cover him in all scenarios. Incredible. Amrli Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan says Reish Lakish as follows: Bish lama lididi dialfina miluim. So Rabbi Yochanan says, my approach makes sense. I learned it out from miluim, right? I learned out the concept of sequestering from miluim. Just like by miluim, ultimately, again, there were 7 days of sequestering, and then 8th day the avoda. So to Yom Kippur, 7 days of sequestering, Yom Kippur avoda. Hainu disanya ze vaze mazin alav kol shiva mikol chato shahayusham. So we'll say, because it says that halacha lamaisa, so both during the miluim as well as preparation for Yom Kippur. Interestingly enough, every day of that sequestering, they would sprinkle from the ashes of the para aduma onto the Kohen Gadol. So we'll say, we made mention of this a little bit in Shkalim as well. If you take a look at Rashi, Mikol Chato Shahayusham, Rashi says, Mikol Para Upara Hayu Noslin Ketzas Lemishmeres Min Ha'efer Bechel Kimosh Kach Shanim Meseches Para Vani Shamati Efer Para Shal Moshe Lo Kala. So we'll say, it's actually very interesting. Apparently in the Beis HaMikdash, they always used to have some of the ashes from the previous Paros Adumos. Right, there was always ashes there from previous red heifers, and Rashi points out one of the miracles that occurred in the Mikdash is incredible, that the ashes of the para aduma of Moshe, the first para aduma. It's interesting that it calls it Moshe's para aduma, because remember the Torah really phrases it as Elazar's para aduma. But okay, the first para aduma, Moshe's para aduma, the ashes never ran out. So what the Gemara is telling you over here is that all 7 days of the purification process or of the sequestering process, they would sprinkle the Kohen Gadol with whatever ashes of the paraduma were inside of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara says, so Kol Shiva Mikol Chato Shayosham, Dahavi Nami Hazah B'miluim. Because Rabbi say, and Rabbi Yochanan will say that makes sense, because since sequestering was modeled after Miluim, in the 7 days of preparation of the inauguration of the Mishkan, they also sprinkled the Kohanim every single day. So it makes sense why in preparation for Yom Kippur, you would follow that same procedure. Ela l'didach, but according to you, Reish Lakish, you learn out the concept of sequestering, not from Miluim, but you learn out the concept of sequestering from where? From Har Sinai. Hasahazah b'Sinai mihavi. Was there any sprinkling done during the sequestering at Har Sinai? Amrlei uletamech. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Lakish says back to Rabbi Yochanan, and according to you, minecha b'miluim dam hachamayim. Rish Lakish says that's not a good comparison. It's true. They sprinkled the Kohen Gadol every day of the 7 day sequestering before the inauguration of the Mishkan. What did they sprinkle him with? What did they sprinkle him with? Blood. Here, you're sprinkling with water. To which Rabbi Yochanan says, come on, that's not a kasha. Hello kasha. The Tanya B'chia nichnas mayim tachas dam. That's okay. In other words, that we take the concept of sprinkling each and every day of the sequestering, and you're right, by the Milum it was blood, by subsequent Yom Kippurs, ultimately again, it's water, but that's not a kasha. To which the Gemara says, El Didach, Hazah b'Sinai, as the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Tanya B'chia, El Didach, but according to you, Reish Lakish, Hazah b'Sinai mihavi, was there any sprinkling by Har Sinai? So again, it's a problem according to Reish Lakish, because if you're using the sequestering of Har Sinai as the paradigm for sequestering, then ultimately, again, why is it that we're sprinkling every day of the sequestering prior to Yom Kippur if that was not done by Sinai? To which Reish Lakish will respond, very interesting, Amrlei Maila Ba'alma. Ultimately, again, Reish Lakish says, you're right. The fact that they sprinkle on the Kohen Gadol for the 7 days before leading up to Yom Kippur, or for the days leading up to Para Aduma, Reish Lakish will say that's just a chumrah. It's just the chumrah. So for Yom Kippur, it's a chumrah to highlight the kedusha of the day. Remember again, by Para Aduma, we've already seen that we employ a number of chumras. Right? Why do we employ chumras by Para Aduma? Why? Because Para Aduma operates with an incredible kula. Remember again, what's the kula by Para Aduma? Tvul Yom, excellent, right? At the end of the day, we're metamei a kohen to do the avoda as a Tvul Yom on Yom Kippur. So because of that, we constantly offset that kula with multiple other chumras. Reish Lakish will say, you're right, Har Sinai might not have a sprinkling component during this period of sequestering, but that's fine, because the sprinkling component that's part of preparation for Yom Kippur, preparation of Paraduma, are chumras. Good. Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yochanan, Tanya Kavasi de Reish Lakish. Also, you have a brayso that supports Rabbi Yochanan, and a brayso that supports Reish Lakish. Here we go. Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yochanan, a brayso that supports Rabbi Yochanan. Also, remember again, Rabbi Yochanan really only learns out Yom Kippur for the din of sequestering. So the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasi Rabbi Yochanan, Bizos Yava Aron ala Kodesh, ultimately again, with this. So this is by the avodah of Yom Kippur. Bizos Yavo Aron ala Kodesh, Parshat Achrei Mos. With this, Aaron will come into the Kodesh. So the Gemara says, what's the this? What's Bizos with this? To which the Gemara says, B'mash Sha'amar Be'inyan. With that which was stated in another context. So I should say a different thing. The machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, leaving aside what the machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is, where do you learn out the din of sequestering from? Rabbi Yochanan is going to say you learn it out from Miluim. Reish Lakish is going to say you learn it out from Har Sinai. That's the fundamental machlokis over here. So now we're going to develop both these sheets a little bit more. So again, Rabbi Yochanan first. Rabbi Yochanan learning out from Miluim. Bezos Yava Aron ala Kodesh. What's the bezos? B'mash Amar be'inyan Maihi be'inyan demiluim. So we'll say this is fascinating. Rabbi Yochanan says bezos Yava Aron. With this, Aaron will come into the Kodesh on Yom Kippur. What's the this? The this is the process employed by the Miluim. How does Aaron come into the Kodesh on Yom Kippur? Bizos, armed with the same process of the Miluim. Just like the Miluim required 7 days of preparation for 1 day avoda, so to Yom Kippur requires 7 days of preparation for 1 day of avoda. Umma Amar be'inyan de Miluim. And ultimately, again, what does that mean? What was the process of Miluim? Here, Bryce spells it out. Aaron piresh shiva v'shimesh yom echad. Aaron went ahead and sequestered for 7 days and then served on the 8th. Umoshe masrlo kol shiva kedei lechancho ba'avoda. And Moshe will say what happened during those 7 days of Aaron sequestering prior to the Miluim, prior to the inauguration. Moshe Rabbeinu taught him all the halachas. We'll say, remember again, 7 days of sequestering doesn't mean Aaron was all by himself, but it means that he was being taught by Moshe Rabbeinu, he was being taught by his brothers, all of the necessary components by the avoda. Va'af ledoros, and I both say the same applies ultimately for future generations. Kohen Gadol Porei Shiva, U'Mishamesh Yom Echad. The Kohen Gadol is sequestered after Rosh Hashanah. He's sequestered for 7 days leading up to Yom Kippur, and then he does the avoda of Yom Kippur. We'll see this in more depth later on. Ushnei Talmidei Chachamim Talmidav Shel Moshe. I will say 2 Talmidei Chachamim, students of Moshe. I will say, what a beautiful way to refer to a Talmid Chacham. Right? I will say any Talmid Chacham, and by extension, any person who learns Torah is a Talmid of Moshe Rabbeinu. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible? It's always important in life. We all try to find a good Rebbe to role model for us, not just learning, but life. So yet, we're all Talmidim of Moshe Rabbeinu. I learned Moshe's Torah, I'm Moshe Rabbeinu's Talmid. Lafuket Stukin, this is to exclude Stukim. You have to be very careful, because also remember again, as we're going to see, that Stukim had some very different versions of the Avoda of Yom Kippur. So what would the Kohen Gadol do during his sequestering prior to Yom Kippur? 2 Talmidei Chachamim, students of Moshe Rabbeinu, would give him over the avoda. Lafuket stukim. Mosum no kol shiva kedei lechancho ba'avoda. Ultimately, again, they go over the halachas with him in order that he is ready to do the avoda on Yom Kippur. Mikan amru. From here we learned shivas yamim kodem yom kippurim mafrishin kohen gadol mibeso lelishkas parhedrin. From here again, I both say this is the Mishnah. We separate out. We sequester the kohen gadol for 7 days prior to Yom Kippur, and we put him in the parhedrin chamber. Ukashem shemafrishin kohen gadol kach mafrishin kohen hasorev es hapara. And the same way that we sequester the Kohen Gadol prior to the Avodah on Yom Kippur, we also sequester the Kohen Gadol, or the Kohen, I should say, it's not the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen prior to the offering or burning of the Para Aduma. Lalishka Sha'al Pnei Habira Safona Mizracha. To another chamber, remember again what we called Lishkas Ha'even, the stone chamber, which is in the northeast corner of the Beis HaMikdash. Ve'echad zeh, and both the Kohen sequestered for Yom Kippur and the Kohen sequestered for Para Aduma. Mazin alav kol shiva mikol chato shahayusham. We sprinkle upon them the ashes of the Para Aduma, all of the previous paros, each and every day. So we'll say, the brisa is not finished. So we'll say, but again, I just want to point out, this is the brisa which supports Rabbi Yochanan. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, everything is learned out from Miluim. Then I will say, interestingly enough, how do you know that what applied to Miluim applies to Yom Kippur? This is incredible. Bizos yavo Aron ala Kodesh. Yom Kippur, it says, with this Aron will come into the Kodesh. What's the this? What's the this? So the Gemara understands the this is the avoda of Yom Kippur. The avoda of the process of the Miluim. This question of the Miluim. Ve'im tomar, b'miluim dam hachamayim. Maybe you'll say, one second. Yom Kippur, there was sequestering for the Miluim, and the sequestering for Yom Kippur are not the same. Sequestering for Miluim, they sprinkled blood, sacrificial blood upon the Kohen each and every day. But yet, ultimately, again, by sequestering by Yom Kippur, it's mayim, it's water paraduma. That's not a problem. Nichnesu mayim tachas dam. So water came and replaced dam. Va'omer, kasher asa bayom hazeh tziva Hashem lasos lechapra alechem. In the pasuk says, as you have done on this day. Both say this is the pasuk by miluim, as you have done on this day. So Hashem has commanded you lechaper aleichem lasos lechaper aleichem, to perform and to atone for you. The Brisa says lasos elumai separa. Lasos refers to paraduma. Teach you that the din of sequestering applies to paraduma. Lechaper elumas Yom Kippurim, and to atone, this refers to Yom Kippur. So both say this is the Brisa which supports Rabbi Yochanan, essentially learning out the concept of, not essentially, but learning out the concept of sequestering from the din of miluim. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Remember, we'll say, how does the Brisa start? It starts actually with a very beautiful drasha. Bizos yavo Aron ala kodesh. With this, Aaron will come into the Kodesh on Yom Kippur. And the Gemara says, what's bizos with what? With what? So the Gemara posits, armed with the process of miluim. The same preparatory process of miluim, which required sequestering and sprinkling and learning for 7 days. That's the same process that the Kohen Gadol uses to prepare for Yom Kippur. To which the Gemara said, but 1 second, v'hai bizos mi baile legufei. But 1 second, I need that phrase, bizos yavo roseh. There's a pashut pshat. What does it mean, bizos yavo Aron ala kodesh? The bizos refers to the karbanos that the pasuk enumerates. Bepar ben bakar lechatos ve'ayil la'olah. We'll say, so what are you going ahead and darshaning? Bezos with this, Aaron with this, means armed with the process of the miluim. What are you talking about? The pasuk has a pashut pshat. Bezos means Aaron comes into the Kodesh armed with the karbanos of the day. Par ben bakar for chatos, ayil la'olah. Omri, so Rabbi Yochanan will respond, ila karban l'chudei limakra bazeh o ba'ila. If the pasuk was just referring to coming in with the karbanos, the pasuk could have used a shortened form of the word. It could have said bezeh, with this, or be'ila, with these. My bezos, you're both say, whenever the Torah uses a longer form of a word than what was necessary, it's coming to teach us something. So it could have said bazeh, or it could have said be'ila, if it was just referring to the karbanos mentioned in the pasuk. The fact that it uses a longer form of the word bezos indicates to me that it's coming to teach me something additional. Shamas mina tarti. I could learn 2 things from the word bezos. Bezos teaches me that yes, number 1, when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh, he must bring with him his karbanos, the par ben bakar fechatos, and the ayil la'olah. But it also teaches me that he only enters into the Kodesh if he was properly prepared and armed with a preparatory process. What preparatory process is that? The sequestering, learning process, sprinkling process that we learn out from the Miluim. Incredible. My va'omer. What does it mean va'omer? In other words, why do you need that part of the, in the brisa? V'chitema Yom Kippurim kamahu debai prisha kid ashkam b'miluim. Aval Yom Kippurim da'amal lo. Because we'll say maybe you would have thought like this. Maybe in Achinami there's a din of sequestering prior to Yom Kippur, but maybe it's only the first Yom Kippur. Just like both say miluim happened once, there's one inauguration. So maybe by Yom Kippur there is a din of sequestering, but only by the first Yom Kippur. To which the Gemara says, or maybe it's only the first Kohen Gadol who required sequestering, but not future Kohanim Gidolim. So in other words, if you want to be true to the comparison, Miluim happened once, and therefore maybe only you have to do the sequestering for the first Kohen Gadol, for Yom Kippur, or for the first Yom Kippur, to which the Gemara says, Tashma kasher asa. Therefore, I will say the pasuk says kasher asa is what was done. Ultimately, again, kasher asa b'yom hazeh tziva Hashem lasos lechaper aleichem. Therefore, I will say the pasuk, the Gemara understands that pasuk of kasher asa is a future obligation to tell you that which happened over here by the miluim is a process which must be replicated year in and year out. When? By Yom Kippur, by the Kohen Gadol. So we'll say that is the brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan, effectively learning out the din of sequestering of hafrasha from Miluim. Tanya Kavase de Reish Lakish. We'll say have a brisa that supports Reish Lakish. This is incredible. We'll say this is beautiful and what an incredible preparation ultimately for Shavuos as well. So the Gemara says as follows: Tanya Kavase de Reish Lakish. Moshe Allah ba'anan v'niskase ba'anan v'niskadesh ba'anan. Moshe Rabbeinu entered into the cloud. Remember again by Har Sinai, the Torah tells us that the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam descended on the mountain in the form of a cloud. We'll say Rabbi Soloveitchik points out that you find this a couple of times throughout Chumash, that the Shechina presents itself in the form of a cloud. The first time we see this is the Medrash. The Medrash relates that when Avraham Avinu was on the way to the Akedah, so the pasuk says, "Hine anon kasher al hahar," and the Medrash points out there was a cloud attached to the mountain. The Medrash points out that Avraham Avinu was walking. He says to Yishmael, "Do you see that?" And Yishmael says, "I don't know what you're talking about." He says to Yitzchak, "Do you see that?" And Yitzchak said, "Yes, Father, I see a large cloud attached to the top of the mountain." Yishmael didn't see the Shekhinah. Yitzchak Avinu did see the Shekhinah. Why does the Shekhinah present itself as a cloud? Because also clouds are very interesting, which is when you look at them, so they look tangible, they look solid, but yet again, we say anytime you fly, you see it just cut right through the clouds, and sometimes they're here, and sometimes they're there, sometimes they look whole, sometimes they dissipate. An incredible metaphor for the Shekhinah. I perceive the Ribono Shel Olam, and I know with all of my heart about His presence, and I know that He's here with me, yet there are so many parts of Him that are ambiguous, that are unidentifiable, that are ununderstandable, much like the clouds. So the Gemara goes right to the Gemara says, so according to Yesh Lakish, Moshe Rabbeinu went into the cloud, V'nes Kaseh Ba'anan, he was enveloped by the cloud, V'nes Kadesh Ba'anan, and he was sanctified in the cloud. Kadei L'kabel Torah L'Yisrael B'Kedusha. In order to say this is incredible, see what the Gemara is saying over here is that Moshe Rabbeinu's entry into the cloud has like a cleansing-like experience for Moshe Rabbeinu as well. Shnei Amar, Vayishkon Kvod Hashem al Har Sinai. The pasuk says that the glory of Hashem, or the honor of Hashem, rests on Har Sinai. Zeh haya ma'isa achar aseres hadibros sheyutchila la'arbayim derbi Yosef li'ir. So it's very interesting. So we're going to see a little bit of a machlokes on the timeline of Matan Torah. So Rabbi Yosef Lili holds that halacha l'ma'isa, the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam descending on the mountain, occurred after aseres hadibros. First, there's the giving of the 10 Commandments. Then there's the descent of the Ribono Shel Olam onto the mountain, the cloud covering the mountain, and then Moshe Rabbeinu entering into the cloud. And this was the beginning of the 40 days. We'll discuss how you count the days in just a moment. Rabbi Akiva says no. Vayishkon kavod Hashem mirosh chodesh. In Rabbi Akiva holds no. The first thing that happened is the cloud descended on the mountain. And when did that occur? Rosh Chodesh Sivan. That's the first thing. Klal Yisrael comes to Midbar Sinai on Rosh Chodesh, and the first thing that happens is the cloud descends upon the mountain. Amud Beis, and this is what I'll say all before Aseres Hadibros. Amud Beis, Vayichaseo Anon Lahar, Vayikra Al Moshe. The Chol Yisrael Omdin, the cloud covered the mountain. Hashem called out to Moshe. The Chol Yisrael Omdin, and all of Klal Yisrael was standing there. V'lo boha kosev ela lachlok kavod LaMoshe. And understand, the pasuk is only coming ultimately, again, to give cover to Moshe. What does that mean? That although Moshe Rabbeinu was standing with all of Klal Yisrael, because remember again, in Rabbi Akiva's model, Klal Yisrael comes to Midbar Sinai, ultimately again on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. The cloud comes down and covers the mountain on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Moshe Rabbeinu is standing there with Klal Yisrael, yet interestingly enough, the pasuk says that Hashem called out to Moshe. Why does it say Hashem called out to Moshe? Moshe Rabbeinu is standing with all of Klal Yisrael to give cover to Moshe Rabbeinu. That although Moshe is standing there with all of Klal Yisrael, Hashem is dafka calling Moshe. Rabbi Nassan Omer, Lo ba'a kosev ela l'marik, this is incredible. Lo ba'a kosev ela l'marik achila ushtia shevmeyav. So we'll say this is incredible. If you take a look at Rashi, Lamarik Achilu Shtia, Rabbi Nassan Savalok Rabbi Yossi Agalili. So we'll say we're jumping back and forth a little bit. Remember again, Rabbi Nassan also Rabbi Yossi Agalili. What Rabbi Yossi Agalili say? Rabbi Yossi Agalili felt that halacha l'maisa. First there was the Aseres Hadibros, right? First was Aseres Hadibros. Then the cloud came down. So according to Rabbi Yossi Agalili, so that's Rabbi Yossi Agalili, right? Just to understand the machlokes here. Rabbi Yossi Agalili says, first Aseres Hadibros, then cloud, and that was the beginning of the 40 days of Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, we'll see about the 40 days in just a moment. Rabbi Akiva, no. First came the cloud. The cloud already came Rosh Chodesh Sivan. The cloud was there already before Aseres Hadibros. Comes along Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Nassan in principle agrees with Rabbi Yossi Agalili that the cloud came after the Aseres Hadibros. And what was the role of the cloud after Aseres Hadibros? It was to prepare Moshe Rabbeinu for the 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain. How was Moshe Rabbeinu prepared? His body was purged of food and drink. Remember again, we know that when Moshe Rabbeinu was on the mountain, Moshe Rabbeinu himself says, Lechem lo achalti, mayim lo shasisi. I didn't eat, I didn't drink. Rabbi Nassan is coming along and saying, and by the way, in preparation for that angelic experience, Moshe Rabbeinu's body was purged of food and drink, so that he should be like the Malachi Asharis. Now look at Rashi once more. Rabbi Nassan, so like Rabbi Yosef Lili, the Prisha LaMoshe Habi, Achlo Lilmod Mikana Shar Nechnas LaMachana Shechina Prisha, Shelo Haisa Prisha Zu Ella, Shebeshishi Yam Halalu, Nismarko Achilo Shemayim Lios Kimalachi Asharis. So we'll get to that in just a bit. Rabbi Nassan says that this sequestering of Moshe was unique for this experience, because Hashem needed Moshe Rabbeinu to be more angel than man for Kabbalah Sator and Har Sinai, and amazingly enough, the cloud purged him of food and drink. Both of these, what we said before, that the cloud itself cleansed the Moshe Rabbeinu. According to Rabbi Nassan, it cleansed him in a very physical sense, cleansing him of food and drink. Rabbi Masya ben Charash Omer, Lo ba'akasav ela la'ayim alav, the truth is, Ramasya ben Charash says that the cloud only came to instill fear in Moshe Rabbeinu. To instill fear, it was to prepare Moshe Rabbeinu for the experience of Kabbalah Satorah and instill within him a certain level of fear. Shene'emar, Ibdu as Hashem bi'ira, vegilu bira'ada. Serve Hashem with fear, vegilu, and rejoice with trepidation. My vegilu bira'ada, what does that mean, rejoice with trepidation? Amrav Adabar Masna, Amrav, b'makom gila, sham tehira'ada. So wherever there is rejoicing, there has to be some element of trepidation, which again is in general, this is a much bigger discussion about the concept that joy must always be tempered. Right? Because unchecked joy, unchecked simcha becomes hololus, becomes frivolity. This is incredibly important. That's why whenever we have simcha, there's always a check on that simcha. Right? I'll think about this in just a moment. Right? This is why one of the reasons we break a glass under the chuppah by a chasna is in order to go ahead and check the simcha. I will say even Purim, which is an incredible day of simcha. What's the check on the simcha of Purim? Right? I was gonna say Ma'ariv, right? Ma'ariv, but again, same idea, because Mincha you could daven beforehand, right? But again, Ma'ariv, I'll say in all seriousness, Ma'ariv is the great check on Purim, because there's no Pitur from Ma'ariv on Purim. So this idea, it's an incredible idea. See, even Purim, which is a day of exaggerated simcha, there's always a check, right? There's always something there that keeps everything in order. So the Gemara says that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, the cloud was there ultimately, again, to instill within him a certain feeling of reverence and fear. So I'm sorry, the Gemara says, B'mai kamiflagi. So what are they arguing about? What are they arguing about? Well, listen to this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva. What are they arguing about? Well, they're arguing about the timeline of Matan Torah. This is incredible. Beplugta dahani tarai. Rabbi say in reality, the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yosef Lili about when the cloud came is really a fundamental machlokes about the timeline of Kabbalah's HaTorah. What's the machlokes here? Rabbi say this is incredible. The Sanya b'shisha b'chodesh nitna Torah Yisrael. So Rabbi say the Brisa says first wide line Dalaram days. The Gemara says, on the 6th of Sivan, the Torah was given. Vav Sivan. Rabbi Yossi says, no, B'Shiva Bo. No, Torah wasn't given on the 6th of Sivan. Torah was given on the 7th of Sivan. Man Damar B'Shisha Nitna B'Shiva Allah. So says, we're going to see, everyone agrees that Moshe Rabbeinu goes up the mountain on the 7th of Sivan. Everyone agrees with that. So the first opinion will say, Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan, and Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on the 7th. Man Domer B'Shiva, the one who says Torah was given on the 7th of Sivan, B'Shiva Nitna u'B'Shiva Allah. That ultimately Torah was given on the 7th, and Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on the 7th. So again, everyone agrees Moshe Rabbeinu ascended the mountain on the 7th of Nisan. The shaila is, when was Kabbalah Satorah? Was it on the 6th? Was it on Machlokes? Moshe Yom HaShvi. Rabbi Yosef Lili Savak Tanakama. So Rabbi Yosef Lili holds like the Tanakama, meaning that Torah was given on the 6th, and Moshe Rabbeinu ascended on the 7th. Damar b'shisha b'chodesh nitna Torah. Rabbi Yosef Lili holds Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan. Therefore, Hilchach ze haya maisa achar aseres hadibros. Therefore, Rabbi Yosef Lili holds that the coming down of the cloud occurred after the Aseres HaDibros. So the Aseres HaDibros are given on the 6th of Sivan, and then after that the cloud comes down. Vayishkon kavod Hashem al Har Sinai, vayichaseyu ha'anan sheishes yamim. Ultimately, again, then Hashem calls out to Moshe on the seventh day. Now, both just to understand the timeline over here. So, according to Yosef, here's what happens: Torah is given on the 6th. The cloud comes down on the 7th, and the cloud envelops Moshe Rabbeinu for 6 days until Hashem calls him on the 7th, which becomes the 13th of Sivan. I'm sorry. So, what happens? Lekabuli Shar Torah. Because if you hold that the cloud came down on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, so if you're going to tell me that Hashem called out to Moshe on the 7th day to receive the Aseres HaDibros, he already received the Aseres HaDibros on the 6th of Sivan. And the cloud would have been gone by the 6th day. And if you're starting the timeline too early, if you start from Rosh Chodesh, Rabbi Akiva, so we'll say that's Rabbi Yossi. That's Rabbi Yossi Lili. Rabbi Akiva, so we'll look at Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say it's a little bit confusing, right? Rabbi Yossi Lili agrees with the Tana Kama that again the timeline is Torah given on 6th, Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on the 7th, and the Anan comes after. The Anan comes after Aseres HaDibros. Rabbi Akiva so like Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Yossi. The Amar b'shiva b'chodesh nitna Torah Yisrael. Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha l'maisa. Torah was given on the 6th. When we say Torah, Aseres HaDibros was given on the 6th, and ultimately again on the 7th, and Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on the 7th. So Bishlam the Rabbi Akiva, and Abbas, remember again, according to Rabbi Akiva, when was the cloud? When did the cloud cover the mountain? Rosh Chodesh Sivan already, right? Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Bishlam the Rabbi Akiva, Hainu de Mishkachas La Bishivasar B'Tamas Nishtabra Luchos. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Akiva, let's work backwards, because presumably everyone agrees on one fact, which is Moshe Rabbeinu comes down when? On Shivasar B'Tamas. Remember again, he comes down, things don't go very well. He smashes the Luchos as a result of the Cheta Egel, the sin of the golden calf. So remember, let's back into the timeline. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu comes down on the 17th of Tammuz makes sense. Nishtabra Luchos is why? Esin va'arban de Sivan, because ultimately, again, you have 24 days of Sivan, right after when Moshe Rabbeinu goes up, Vishisar de Tammuz, and 16 days of Tammuz, Malaluhu Arban Yomin, that's 40 days. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu comes down on the 17th of Tammuz. So the Gemara says, Malaluhu Arban Yomin, Dahava Bahar, O Beshivsar B'Tammuz, Nachas, and 17th of Tammuz he comes down, Va'asa V'Tavrinhu Leluchos, and he comes down and he breaks the Luchos on the 17th of Tammuz. Ella, Rabbi Yossi Lili de Amar Shisha de Prisha va'arba'in dahar ad de esrin utlas b'tamaz. Also, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu is effectively not really going up until the 13th of Sivan. If that's the case, then Lamaisa, according to that time frame, Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't be descending the mountain until the 23rd of Tammuz. And therefore, again, Shviras Haluchos, the breaking of the Luchos, wouldn't be on the 17th of Tammuz, but instead it would be on the 23rd of Tammuz. So Rabbi this is very interesting. See, according to Rabbi Akiva, there's the 7 days of sequestering preparation and then the ascension to the mountain. According to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, he will say that the 6 days of preparation were part of the 40. Therefore, he'll agree, everyone agrees that Moshe Rabbeinu comes down on the 17th of Tammuz. Amar Mar, Vaikra Moshe v'chol Yisrael omnin. So we'll say, so that's the machlokes regarding Kabbalah HaTorah. About ultimately, again, was Torah given on the 6th, Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on the 7th, or ultimately, again, do they get the Torah on the 7th and he goes up on the 7th? So everyone's agreeing that he goes up on the 7th. The further machlokes we'll say is, how does sequestering fit into all of this? Was sequestering beforehand? Was sequestering afterwards? When does the cloud come down on the mountain? Is that on Rosh Chodesh, or ultimately, again, is it immediately after Aseres HaDibros? These are all of the machloksim, ultimately, again, that are occurring. We'll say, I'll just point out very quickly something amazing. It's always bothered me. Because remember, the primary sugi here is Masechah Shabbos. The Gemara is quoting it here from Shabbos. We'll say, what's so dramatic about this Gemara? There could be machlokis about a lot of things. If you would assume the one thing there is no machlokis about, it would be what? It would be what? Kabbalah HaTorah. But it's like Kabbalah HaTorah is the most important event, not only in our history, but in the history of mankind. Remember again, Rashi in the beginning of Bereshit says, the only reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu went ahead and gave and created the world was why? for Kabbalas Torah. Vayerev vayivoker Yom Hashishi. Why Hashishi? Rashi says because the sixth day, the 6th of Sivan, was going to be the day when Klal Yisrael accept Torah that made creation worthwhile. How could there be date ambiguity? How could there be any level of ambiguity around the Sinai, right? It's amazing. We know when Moshe Rabbeinu died. We know when Rachel Imenu's yard site is. We know when we left Mitzrayim. We know everything. We know everything. Right? How could there be machlokus about Kabbalas HaTorah? So I think it's by design. There's a beautiful, beautiful piece by the Piazetzna, Hashem Yikom Damo, in the Ish Kodesh. The Ish Kodesh says in the year Tafshin, 1939, in Parshas Yisro. So very quickly, I will say, I'm not going to tell you the whole vart, although it's really incredible. So the Piazetzna says as follows. The pasuk says, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha." You have to love Hashem with all of your heart, all of your heart. So Rashi HaKadosh says, "B'chol levavcha shelo yeh libcha chaluk ala makom." Your heart should not be divided against the Ribono Shel Olam. Which again, Pasha Pshat means what? You have to love Hashem when times are good, and you have to love Hashem when times are difficult. You have to love the Ribono Shel Olam. We can't be a fair weather friend to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have to say Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha with all of your heart. Don't let your heart be divided against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Piazetzna says something absolutely amazing. He quotes his grandfather. He says something absolutely amazing. He says, Shlo yeh libcha chalak ala makom means, do not let your heart be tethered geographically to one particular place. Meaning what? It's an incredible. Don't let your heart be divided on the makom, on the place. What does this mean? The Piazetzna says that sometimes people think they could only be inspired and only be spiritual and only be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if you're in one particular place. If I was here, right? If I, and again, I will say, we think about this all the time. If I was in Eretz Yisrael, if I was here, does Eretz Yisrael have a Kedusha? It's a good day to speak about this, of course. And could the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael be replicated anywhere else? Absolutely, unequivocally not. But does that mean that the only place to have a meaningful relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in Eretz Yisrael? Or is in a particular community, in a particular place? No. The Ribono Shel Olam is accessible to us anywhere and everywhere we are. This, says the Piazetzna, is the meaning of Shelo yehi libcha chaluk al hamakom. Let your heart not be fooled into thinking that spirituality is only accessible in a particular geographic location. Wherever we are, that's where the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is as well. So this day, and by the way, I just want to point out, the Piazetzna was saying this in 1939 in the Warsaw Ghetto. So you understand what he's saying to that congregation of the broken heart? He's giving this drush on Shabbos. You understand what he's saying? What he's saying is, at the end of the day, we are in Gehenna. But you know what? The Ribono Shel Olam is in Gehenna also. Wherever the Jew is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. Don't think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not with us here. Don't think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not accessible here. Wherever the Jew is, that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is as well. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha shlo yeh libcha chaluk al hamakom. Never tether spirituality to one particular address or geography. Wherever the Jew is, that's where the Ribono Shel Olam is as well. So perhaps that's the pshat. See, Rabosai, there's the date ambiguity surrounding Kabbalas HaTorah is by design. Because what would happen if you knew the exact date of Kabbalas HaTorah? What would be the propensity to say, this is the day for Kabbalas HaTorah. This is the day. And what would happen is we would go ahead and assign undue importance of Torah to one particular day. So what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? There's date ambiguity. And what's the message? The message is, I will say, every day is Kabbalas HaTorah. Every day. Which day was the Torah received? Not sure. It might have been Vav. It might have been Zayin. When did the cloud come down? Not sure. Rosh Chodesh, Zayin. When did Moshe Rabbeinu go up to the mountain? Well, that we're sure. Zayin. Right? But I will say, but there's inherent date ambiguity by every part of Kabbalas HaTorah. Do not assign Torah importance to one day. Every day is Kabbalas HaTorah. Every day is the opportunity to receive from Har Sinai. Every day is the opportunity to go ahead and receive our beautiful Masorah, to be Talmidim of Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like spirituality is not tethered to geography, spirituality is also not tethered to the calendar. It's also not tethered to any one particular day. Every day is the opportunity for Kabbalas HaTorah. Incredible. So let's go a little bit weiter. Says the Gemara. Amar Mar, Vaikra Moshe v'chol Yisrael omdin. So we'll remember again, even though the pasuk says that Hashem spoke to Moshe, called out to Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu was standing by Har Sinai with all of Klal Yisrael. Moshe v'chol Yisrael omdin. V'lo ba'akasav elalach lo kavod l'Moshe. And I will say, so why does the Torah seem to indicate that Hashem is singling out Moshe? It was a kavod to Moshe Rabbeinu. What was the kavod? Even though Moshe is standing with all of Klal Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu dafka speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Gemara goes like to Meisvei, Kol lo, Kol ilav, Moshe shama, v'chol Yisrael lo shamu. So we'll say, when the pasuk says, Kol lo and Kol ilav. So we'll say, if you take a look at Rashi very quickly, it's almost right across. Rashi says, Kol lo, Kol ilav, vayishmas hakol medaber ilav. Moshe Rabbeinu heard the voice speaking to him. So lo haya yachalom, lo haya yachalomar v'kasav medaber ilav, lamdecha she'ilav levado haya nimshach hakol ba'oi moed. V'shukam mishkan, v'nedaber ilam al paroches, lo haya kol nishma li Yisrael. I'm just reading Rashi quickly. The high krav devayishmas hakol ba'oi moed ksiv, reishi the krav ba'bo shalom. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, so it says Moshe Shama v'chol Yisrael lo Shama lo kasha ha b'Sinai ha ba'ohel moed. So we'll say, interestingly enough, at Har Sinai, there was a voice of the Ribbon Shalom that everyone heard. Right by the first two dibros, everyone heard the Ribbon Shalom. It was only from the time that the Mishkan was put up and on that, whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu would speak, only Moshe would hear it. No one else would hear it. Be by Sema. Other possibility is lo kasha, ha b'kriya, ha b'dibor. Or we'll say the other possibility is there are different ways of calling out. There's kriya and there's dibor, right? Kriya, as we're going to see, is a more generic calling out versus dibor, which is a bit more of a personalized calling out. Rabbi Zreika, Rami Kra, Kameid Rabbi Lazar, V'amri Rabbi Zreika, Rabbi Lazar, Rami Ksiv, V'lo Yachal Moshe, Lavo al Oal Moed, Kishachan alav ha'anan. Both say one pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu could not come into the Mishkan because the cloud representing the presence of the Ribbon Shalom descended upon the Almighty, the Mishkan. Uksiv vayava Moshe b'soch ha'anan. And yet another pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu entered into the mountain. Melamed shetavsa HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe be'eviu ba'anan. Both say this is beautiful. In reality, Moshe Rabbeinu was not able to access the Oel Moed because the presence of Hashem was there. But there was a cloud on Har Sinai, and yet Moshe Rabbeinu was able to get in there. How did that happen? Let's listen to this imagery. Because what happened on Har Sinai? How did Moshe enter the cloud of Har Sinai if he was unable to enter into the Oel Moed when the cloud was situated on top of it? Because Kiviyachal, the Ribbon Shalom, grabbed him and pulled him in. Isn't that beautiful? The Rabbi say, where there is an intense manifestation of divine presence, it could be that human entry is forbidden. But what happened by Har Sinai is that the Ribbon Shalom B'chvodo Ba'atzmo reached out and pulled Moshe Rabbeinu, inviting him, Moshe Rabbeinu, to join him in the inner mechitza of Har Sinai. Right? The Rabbi say, we'll just debate Rabbi Shalom very quickly. Rabbi Shalom, Tana Nemar Kan B'soch V'Nemar La'alan B'soch V'Yavo B'nei Yisrael B'soch Hayom Ma La'alan Shvil D'chsiv Amayim Lemchoma Av Kan Shvil. So Rabbi say the Gemara then goes and equates Matan Torah with Kriyas Yamsov. It says Toch, right? It says Soch by both of them, inside. So just by Kriyas Yamsov, ultimately the sea split, and there was a path that was made through the sea for Klal Yisrael, so too by Matan Torah. The Ribbon Shalom made a shvil. He made a pathway through the cloud and invited Moshe Rabbeinu to join him for this incredible moment of spiritual intimacy. We'll stop over here. We're not finished with Kabbalas HaTorah. And Mir Hashem, more to come tomorrow. Shkoyach.